In 356 BC, a little boy was born who changed the world in a way few humans in history ever achieved. Alexander III of Macedon was born in Pella in the north of modern-day Greece to Philip II, king of Macedon. Alexander was raised as the heir to his father's kingdom and received military training and education fit for a king. His tutor was the great philosopher Aristotle. As a teenager, Alexander followed his father in battle as Philip subdued the other Greek city-states and became the sole ruler of the Greek people. In 336 BC, Alexander's rise to king was expedited when, while attending a family wedding with all of Philip's court, Philip was assassinated by the captain of his bodyguards. On the spot, Alexander was proclaimed king at the tender age of 20. The following 12 years were some of the most unprecedented and successful military conquests in recorded history. Alexander took the Greek army and crossed into Asia, modern-day Turkey. There, he began to win battle after battle against the Persian army of Darius III, king of the most extensive empire history had ever seen. It's worth taking a moment to understand the greatness of the Persian Empire that Alexander was up against. The Persian Empire was founded 200 years before Alexander the Great by Cyrus the Great, the same Cyrus we read about in the Bible who defeated the Babylonian Empire and returned the Israelites to Jerusalem from their exile in Babylon. Cyrus's defeat of the Babylonian Empire solidified his Persian Empire as the dominant empire. Even Egypt was conquered and incorporated into the Persian Empire. You're probably familiar with another Persian king. 60 years after Cyrus returned the Israelites to Jerusalem, the new king of the Persians, Xerxes, marched his army into Europe. Xerxes is marching south down the Greek coast, heading to destroy Athens for its participation in revolts against the Persian Empire. Well, en route, Xerxes is met by the Spartan king Leonidas and his small force of Spartans at Thermopylae, which was a narrow pass on the coast between the oceans and the mountains, and the only route Xerxes had to move his massive army towards Athens. It was here the Greeks chose to form a blockade. Now, the topography has changed over the past 2.5 millennia, so it no longer looks like a narrow pass. But in ancient times, the water came up near the mountains. There was very little room to maneuver troops, limiting the effectiveness of Xerxes' hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Leonidas' Spartans and a few other Greeks valiantly held the pass for 3 days of fighting, only to be betrayed by a local Greek who showed the Persians a path around the Spartans, allowing the Persians to outflank them. Leonidas and his Spartans made their heroic last stand, but the overwhelming number of Persian army overtook them. Xerxes and his men marched on and sacked Athens, a destruction that was still in the minds of Alexander's men 150 years later. Interestingly, it is this same Xerxes you'll remember from the book of Esther in the Bible, whose harem Esther joins, putting Esther in a position to help save the Jewish people from destruction. Isn't that wild? Cyrus the Great, Xerxes, Esther, Leonidas. The amazing history of the Persian Empire befits its historical greatness. That is the Persian Empire that Alexander and his army are up against. Undeterred by the might of the Persian Empire, Alexander pulls off victory after victory, driving his army down through Lebanon, Israel, and into Egypt, where Alexander is declared a god and establishes the city of Alexandria, one of the most important cities in the ancient world. Having conquered the Western Persian Empire, Alexander now turns his sights on the heart of Darius's empire, Can Alexander continue his unmatched streak of dominance to the Persian throne? First, let's catch up on how we got here. Recalling the prior video in this series, 1177 BC marks a convenient date for the fall of Bronze Age civilization, when the Sea Peoples battled Egypt. Egypt survived the invasion, but the rest of the Mediterranean world did not, resulting in the collapse of trade networks and the end of Bronze Age civilization. After this, the Eastern Mediterranean fell into a 400-year decline in wealth, art, and literacy called the Greek Dark Ages. So, the Sea Peoples had wiped the civilizational slate clean, and it took over 4 centuries to reestablish civilization in the Mediterranean world. The reestablishment of civilization after the Greek Dark Ages is what we call classical antiquity. It was centered around Greek and Roman civilizations, which is why it is often referred to as the Greco-Roman world. Classical antiquity lasted for over 1,200 years, beginning around 776 BC, the date of the first Olympiad, the ancient precursor to the modern Olympics. For another landmark, 776 BC is a little before Homer pens the Iliad and the Odyssey. Classical antiquity ends at the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD. So it is 1,200 years, a long period of history, but this is the foundation of Western civilization. That foundation is Greco-Roman art, architecture, literature, philosophy, law. These are the building blocks that Christianity built into Western civilization and Christendom. As we will see in the following episodes, Christianity preserved classical culture by taking what was true, good, and beautiful in those pagan traditions and transforming them in light of Christian beliefs and practices. So, after 4 centuries of Greek Dark Ages, civilization was reestablished in the Mediterranean in Greece. Greece is a rocky isthmus jutting into the Mediterranean Sea, surrounded by thousands of small islands. The rugged land is not suited for agriculture, except for hardy olive trees and grapevines. So ancient Greeks were forced to sail to other lands to trade olive oil, wine, and pottery to feed their population. Their reliance on sailing forced the Greeks to study the wind, stars, and tide, and how to fashion better boats, all of which fostered the mindset for science and engineering. Think about how amazing it is that Greek mathematics, invented almost 2,500 years ago, is still taught today. Take Euclid, whose magnum opus Elements synthesized geometry, number theory, and mathematical proofs. After the Bible, Euclid's Elements might be the most studied book in Western history. Or Archimedes, who described levers and the principle of buoyancy, who nearly invented calculus almost 2,000 years before Sir Isaac Newton. And I know you are familiar with Pythagoras, whose theorem is taught to middle schoolers all across the US. Not to be left out, Greek astronomers developed the first 3-dimensional model to explain the motion of the planets and invented the Antikythera mechanism, the earliest known astronomical computer. The logic-driven Greeks improved their tools and their lives through mathematics and early scientific thinking. When it comes to the political history of Greece, geography is essential. The mountains and islands of Greece made it difficult for anyone to conquer and hold the entirety of the region, which led to the development of city-states, consisting of a town or city and the immediate surrounding countryside. Citizenship was tied to land ownership and the duty to fight to protect one's city. This led to local loyalties, not to some far-flung empire. So, for centuries, there was no Greece, just independent city-states like Athens, Sparta, and Corinth. Greece's history is the story of independent city-states fighting each other, and only occasionally teaming up when an outside force invaded, like with Xerxes and the Persians. Now, since citizenship was tied to land ownership and the duty to fight to defend one city, the advent of democracy in Athens around 500 BC meant that only a minority of individuals were considered citizens and allowed to participate in democratic institutions. Women, slaves, and foreigners were not allowed to participate. So, early democracy was small-scale direct democracy, where only a minority of an already small population could participate. This early direct democracy is only loosely related to the modern large-scale representative democracy currently practiced in the Western world. However, it is still fundamental to the philosophical foundations of Western civilization. Unsurprisingly, when such inquisitive, logically inclined people like the Greeks put their minds to thinking about governing their city-states, they invented political philosophy. But that undersells the Greeks. They invented all of philosophy: metaphysics, logic, epistemology. They invented it all. You know the big three: Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the Mount Rushmore of philosophers. But there were hundreds of other top-tier thinkers in ancient Greece. Why? Because the Greeks believed in universal truth. As the Greeks correctly surmised, truth is not relative. It's not your truth and my truth, but one truth for all. But we must search hard and discipline our minds to find the truth and align our lives accordingly. The Greeks realized that behind this physical world, there is a prime mover, an uncaused cause, a perfect being who creates everything that is. That perfect being is true, good, and beautiful. Thus, we should live likewise. Philosophy aims to use reason and logic to understand truth, goodness, and beauty, and to align our lives accordingly. This appreciation for logic and truth is why ancient Greece produced so many philosophers. One way we can see the Greeks' focus on philosophy and mathematics is in their architecture. They searched for truth and beauty in forms, the idea of a thing's absolute, timeless, perfect essence. Greek architecture characterized this by using the golden ratio, or phi. This helped create beautiful buildings that we still admire and copy because those forms are universal. So, Greeks invented philosophy to understand the world and know what was true, good, and beautiful. Additionally, they had practical problems to address, like how to sail farther, faster, with improved navigation and measure the distance between lands. This drive led them to the study of mathematics and science. Truth, goodness, beauty, logic, rationality. These are the building blocks Greece laid for Western civilization. But Greece wasn't perfect in all its ways. There were dark sides to its civilization, and in part 2 of Alexander the Great in Greece, we will look at those dark sides and at the end of Alexander's story.